Shana Tova, everyone. Expression Gmar Chsim Tova as we stand the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I hope everybody feels refreshed and renewed. As the mystics say, the Holy Arizal and also the Alter Rebbe Reb Shneur Zalman, that on Rosh Hashanah a new energy enters into the cosmos. A new energy enters into existence into each one of us. So it would be nice to hear that all of you feel new, fresh, and able to take on any new challenges with new possibilities, new dreams, and so on. As we all know, that's one of the hardest things in life, because we are often, more often than not, products of our pasts, shall we say. Some of us even think of themselves as victims of circumstances, and our lives have been shaped by many different things, starting from our early childhood and through all the years. And everybody here knows your own life stories. Everybody's got their impressions, and as one of the beautiful analogies for this is that we're all born like a warm ball of wax, and every experience that we encounter, for good and for bad, etches its mark inside our psyches. And as we harden, as the wax hardens, this becomes part of our personalities. And that's why the debate whether nurture or nature often becomes moot, because at some point there's an expression in some of the middle-aged sages. They write that teva, hergel nasa teva. Sometimes habits become our second nature, as they call it. Sometimes it even becomes our first nature. Today we know, especially in neurology, that the neurons get wired based on our experiences. There's an expression they have, is that as the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. So sometimes our attitudes are actually part of shaping who we are. So when you have a negative attitude, that itself becomes your mindset. So there's a whole past that each of us has, which is one of the powerful reasons why Rosh Hashanah is such an important day, because it's really telling you and telling us that you have new hope, and that you are not a product of the past, even though you've been shaped by it. But you're definitely not a victim, and your destiny has not been doomed or determined. That there's always a new openings. So that's my blessing to all of you, that this year should be one of new openings in every part of your lives, whether it's personal, relationships, of course, is up there, dealing with our own inner fears and demons and insecurities. New openings in that regard. New openings, of course, in parnasa, which is livelihood. Being able to earn the proper income in this material world. As one of the Rebbes once said, that God should bless you with much material, so you should be able to take matter and turn it into spirit. If you have more matter, you have more matter to turn into spirit. But you have to remember the second half as well. And the year of blessings in every possible way, whether it's for our own families, children, those that need to find their soulmate, those that have their soulmate. There are many. All of us can use blessings. I would agree. We'd all agree to that, right? So whatever it is that you need, both in the material or spiritual realm, may this year be such new openings. And being that we're between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the doors are open. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, and as such, let's consider this evening as a Pre-Yom Kippur workshop, a Pre-Yom Kippur, we shall say, training. Because, as I mention often, or almost always here, that even though a new energy maybe enters into existence, well, for sure enters into existence, but the question of whether we will be able to benefit from it is a whole other story. You know, how many people have you met in your life that may have been great blessing, but you were not ready to receive it? So blessings are a two-way street. You can get a blessing, but if you don't have a container, it's like someone, let's say you're thirsty, and someone's offering you water, but you don't have a cup, you have no way to contain it, then the blessing is there, but it can't be absorbed. And the same is obviously true in things that are not so tangible. Absorbing a blessing is in itself need a blessing to be able to absorb a blessing. There's actually an expression, one of the verses that says, "V'hu yichalkalecha," that God should bless you with the containers to be able to receive blessing. Now, they say in the Eastern discipline, some say, when the student is ready, the teacher shall come. And the same is true with every area in our lives. There was many years ago, 7-8 years ago, there was a couple, they were dating, and they were coming to this class, and it was pretty clear that they were very compatible and they really loved each other. But as whatever would have it, they decided to split up. And I didn't really get involved because I don't initiate unless I'm invited, and even then I don't really say much. I believe that people have to find their way. What you can do is empower people and give them the right skills and help them develop the tools. But ultimately, choices have to be made by us. And the best mentors are those that can give you the confidence and strength to make your choice. You don't want anyone making your choice for you, even though sometimes it may seem easier that someone else make the decision. So anyway, so this couple decided to go each their own way, and I just was an observer. I watched it. Well, good news is that they both got into a lot of trouble. No, that's not the good news. That's the good news is what happened after that. And just 2 years ago, they got married after a break of around 5 years. And today they'll say that they're soulmates. So the interesting study in a certain exercise here, we have a specimen to the study without names. What exactly happened here? Well, what happened to them is what happens to very often to many of us, maybe in different forms or fashions. When they were first dating, 7-8 years ago, there was too much distraction in their lives, and they couldn't focus on what mattered. So they just, this one felt he was in the middle of building a business. The woman felt that she was getting a new job. All kinds of things going on. And this, so there's, I don't know how much attention they really even gave to each other and to their relationship. What happened was, some things happened that didn't work out in their lives, in the more material realm. This one's business failed, and her work didn't work out, and the money and so on. And suddenly, at some point, the cracks, they realized what is most important. And so why did they have to, and I always ask them, I said, so why did you have to go through 5 years of all this agonizing and trying to date others and all the ups and downs, as we know, relationships, you can't live with them, you can't live without them, that whole thing. So they said, listen, they just were not able to hear. And that's often what I find, the situation where many of us getting what we need, but we have too much, shall we say, turbulence, too much static in our lives, so you can't even receive. You can't even listen with full attention. So one of the key gifts, I would say, one of the key tools of this season, the holiday season, especially Yom Kippur, as we're leading to that, is the tool of we'll call it silence. Yom Kippur is a silent day. There's not a lot of fanfare. There's obviously no meals. There's no parties. It's a very quiet day. But it's interesting because it comes in contrast to another day, which was the exact opposite. And seemingly, it's a twin of Yom Kippur, and that is Shavuos. It's a holiday when the Torah was given. So, which is exactly 120 days rather, before Yom Kippur is the holiday of Shavuos. What was that day? The story of Sinai. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and receives the tablets, spends 40 days, 40 nights. When he returns, upon his return, to his chagrin, he finds, he already knew because God told him that there's trouble down below, and he said, he finds that they built a golden calf, which was a grave sin. God just told him in the 10 Commandments, do not build false gods. Built a golden calf. Story, you all know the story that Moses shatters the tablets, but then returns back up on the mountain to pray for forgiveness. And it takes him another 80 days to achieve that. And Yom Kippur, which is in a few days from now, he will return. So right now Moses is technically still in the Mount Sinai. And he will return on Yom Kippur with the second tablets. And with the promise of forgiveness and the promise of hope that even if you break something, you can repair it. Now, a very critical theme, which I'll address a little later some more. But let me just go back to this. So Yom Kippur, the interesting thing is, when Moses comes down with the two tablets, the new tablets, the second tablets, it's all done in silence. And there's a medrash that explains why. Because the mountain Sinai, the story at Sinai, if you read the biblical narrative in Exodus, it talks about it was a light and sound show. This was full of fireworks and sounds and noises and light and so on. The Torah describes the day when the Torah was given, what kind of uproar was taking place. The voice of the shofar, the sound of the shofar, lightning, thunder, etc., etc. Because it was a celebration. It was like fireworks. So God said, listen, when you celebrated then, you weren't yet ready. This time, be silent in humility as you receive the Torah. Sometimes you party too much and you take for granted your gifts. So Yom Kippur, in direct contrast to Shavuos, to Matan Torah, the first Matan Torah, in other words, when the first tablets were given, Yom Kippur is done in silence, a type of humility. Because when there's a lot of noise, it's good when you're healthy. But if the noise sometimes drowns out the inner needs of a human being, then what happens is, as I mentioned, but the couple sometimes can't even see the blessings. So Yom Kippur is like shutting down. Too much noise isn't good, but shutting down, allowing the inner soul to emerge. This is in essence what the power of Yom Kippur is. I've mentioned many times that it's the power of hope. Hope. You know, the greatest blessing in life is that you have hope. Hope means that even if things don't work out, there's always hope for more. To ask for a perfect life is not realistic, but to ask for a life that no matter what happens in my life, I will have the strength and the fortitude to forge ahead and know that I can repair even after something is broken is far greater than to tell someone that you can't break it, that will never be broken. I said that's not realistic, but to tell someone that no matter what breaks, you can always fix it, or you can always come back stronger, that's a great gift, and that's the story of Yom Kippur. Now we titled this workshop because if you remember, 12 years ago, 2001, everybody is old enough to remember, right? September 11th, here in New York, you see the two towers of light beaming up downtown Manhattan. I'm sure you all remember where you were. And it was interesting, that year it was right before Rosh Hashanah. September 11th was Tuesday morning. Rosh Hashanah was that weekend, if I recall correctly. This year it's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, 9/11 became etched in everybody's story. 9/11. As soon as someone says 9/11, you know exactly what it means. 9/11, September 11th. Everybody remembers where they were. There's an attack in America, here in New York, the Pentagon, Washington, the plane that went down in the fields in Pennsylvania. And in many ways, many people consider this a watershed moment because it's in a sense where suddenly the Western world, especially America, the Middle East was brought to this soil, which never happened before. And we all know the Middle East is still much the hotbed, the center of the news. Look what's going on there. It's up in flames. Maybe a good title for an article would be "The Middle East is Still in the Middle Ages." It's exactly what's happening. And it's not a small select. You're talking now countries like Egypt, Libya, Syria. And no one knows where this is going to go, because one thing is clear, that it's unstable and unpredictable. And September 11th is when this became a reality right here. Until September 11th, it was happening in that part of the world. It was happening in Israel, terrorist attacks. Thank God that has not happened in a while. Al tiftach peh, as they say. And but now, then it was brought here to this world. And I can tell you from my own personal experience as a speaker, and I travel, after September 11th, my lectures, all the talks I gave wherever I went, changed dramatically. Every time I would bring biblical things before September 11th, people were not interested. After September 11th, biblical references, especially regarding things in Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, the ancestors suddenly became in people's consciousness. I don't know if you know this, but books, the top-selling books that remain for the last 12 years are all books about Islam and Islam thought and so on. Not necessarily bestsellers, because bestsellers are more fads and so on, but it's a continuous flow of books about Islam have become a very, very popular item. Because people are trying to understand what's going on. And really nobody knows what's going on. We know what's underground, what's going on. We know there's unrest. There are many factions. We know that Israel is considered the enemy. But right now we see that the enemy is within the Arab countries themselves. They can't bring peace between themselves. There's not one Arab country that's able, Arab Muslim country I should mention, because Arab and Islam Muslim is not the same. There are Arab countries that are not Islam Muslim, and there are Muslim countries that are not Arabs. So that region is going through its thing, and its effect here has had an effect. First of all, September 11th, and also we all know that the biggest oil exports come from that part of the world. So, though thank God we don't have to tackle and so-called on a daily basis, and there hasn't been another attack, and hopefully will never be another attack here. We should never hear of that. But everyone knows it's a let's call it a boiling pot. It's a boiling pot, volatile. Would be and there is a certain unsettling element to that, even if you don't think about it much. But especially on September 11th, it becomes obvious, because who knows where the next earthquake will take place. As I said again, it should not have any effects on anyone negatively, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to address the topic. But one thing that struck me, it wasn't that year when September 11th happened, it was a few years later, I think it was. In 9/11, I kept 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Everyone uses 9/11, 9/11. And somewhere it started I remember back in my mind, I know that number from somewhere. And long before 2001. So we also know there's also another 9/11. It's called dialing 911, the emergency number. So you have 9/11, 911, which has has its own common denominator. Just happens to be uncanny similarity about emergencies. But that was not the place that I was remembering. And then it came to me. There's perhaps the earliest piece of literature, Jewish literature. Definitely the earliest Kabbalistic work. Some say there's one book before it, but this book called Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is called the Book of Formation. Today we have a very good translation by Arya Kaplan, an excellent translation of the Book of Formation. Some attribute the book to Abraham, who is, as we shall discuss, the ancestor of all the nations. That's where all the trouble began, with Abraham and his children, to be more precise. So the book of Sefer Yetzirah, right in the beginning there, it talks about, it's cryptic and mystical, but today there are many, many Kabbalistic works and Hasidic texts that explain the ideas there, but there's an expression that goes like this: that he, meaning God, emanated 10 emanations. These are what we call the 10 spheres. So it would be like the 10 building blocks. If you're familiar with my book on the Omer, talk about the 7 out of the 10 spheres. 10 spheres. So called Esa spheres blima. That's the expression there. 10 spheres without shape. I will explain it in a moment. I'm just telling you what the text says. And then continues and says the following words: Eser v'lei tesha, 10 and not 9, and then 10 and not 11. Eser v'lei echad asa. So 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. There you go. Right there, a reference to 9 and 11. It's 10 and not 9, and 10 and not 11. So it struck me immediately that, especially when you're familiar with the ideas behind this phrase, which I will elaborate upon in a moment, that right there's a balanced, complete cycle is 10, but it's not 9, and it's not 11. And here 9/11 is both unbalanced both ways. It's -1, 10 minus 9, -1 is 9, and 10 plus 1 is 11. So here we go, 9, 10, 11. What struck me even more was the fact that Yom Kippur is what day of the month? It's the 10th of the month. Yom Kippur is 10 days in Tishrei. So this coming Shabbos, which will be Yom Kippur this Saturday, is the 10th day of the month. So I know this sounds like a whole bunch of numbers, but if you understand the concept, you'll see it's undeniable that it gives us insight both into the events that took place in 9/11, as well as insights into our own personal lives, which of course is the real bottom line. I'm not here just to talk about trivia and global events. Talk about our own personal lives. So what is the significance of this 9, 10, 11? What is the significance? So let me give it start with a preface. What is health? When you talk about health, that's physical health, healthy hygiene, healthy body. So a healthy child is born into this world, and all its functions, thank God, its faculties are working smoothly. But then in life, things happen. First of all, we're exposed to toxins, and we're exposed to environments that somewhat contaminate our healthy bodies. Then, of course, foods we intake, the intake of our foods, then the aging process, and of course also times wounds or accidents that in some way affect our bodies. We have doctors, What is that? A good doctor is somebody who has an understanding of the human physiology and the different function, the different systems that make us function a proper way. You go to a doctor for a checkup, and they can identify what part of your body is a healthy state, what's less healthy, and so on. You ever see, let's say, an X-ray of your lungs? So you can always see, they compare it to here healthy lungs, and here you see an X-ray of lungs. Let's say someone has, God forbid, bronchitis or pneumonia. You can see where the blockages are. So basically, taking an X-ray of the body gives you a good sense of what's going on inside, and if you juxtapose it to a completely healthy body, you could see what's off, and then find interventions or medications or exercises that help realign the body and whatever. And I'm talking about everything from the mind to the heart to the liver to the lungs to the... I'm not going to go through every organ, the body. Same thing, the Maimonides writes, there's a thing called spiritual health. There's physical health, there's spiritual health. And here too, there's a healthy spirit, a healthy way of living your life, and then there's a unhealthy way. Again, we're born pure, untouched, like the freshly fallen snow, and then as life wears us down or wears on us, we adjust to different experiences. As I mentioned earlier, the warm ball of wax starts getting hardened, and it's affected by many different things. Now, physical health, we have medical doctors, and we have books. A lot of studies have been made. Spiritual health, we know less about, which is why it's far harder to find spiritual healing than it is to find physical healing. But spiritual healing means a person who uses their mind in a healthy way, does not distort things, their subjectivity does not block them from looking at something with honesty and sincerity. It means healthy emotions that are not affected or driven by fear or by other forces that don't allow us to just be. Healthy love, healthy discipline, and so on. So just like in physical medicine, there are maps of our DNA, of our genetic makeup, of our systems, our neurological, our circulatory, our nervous, and so on systems. There are also maps of the spiritual system. So the Sefer Yetzirah, which as its name implies, the book of formation, talks about the formation of the human spirit. So on Rosh Hashanah, we know, is this day when the human being was created, Adam and Eve. And that human being was created, as the Bible puts it, that God took dust from the earth and imbued it with a ruach chaim. He infused it with a breath of life, of divine energy. And hence we have a body and a soul. Our body is made up of the elements. Our soul is made up of divine spirit. That's the way the Bible puts it. But is this just a spirit without a nebulous spirit? No. So the Sefer Yetzirah and Kabbalah in general, and Chassidus in particular in our day and age, actually maps out what the soul looks like, what components it's made up. Just like the body has components, has a heart and a mind and all the organs and all the different systems, the soul also has components. And in general they break into 10 faculties, which evolve from 10 spiritual energies. You can say 10 archetypes. And the 10, you may have heard, I've mentioned them many times here. 7 of them are emotions. The book of the Counting of the Omer, where I enumerate them. And 3 of them are intellectual ones, cognitive faculties. So to name them, I'll just tell you the Hebrew names. They go like this. In Chachma Bina Das, we used to say when flies and other insects come around that they may be a reincarnation of a soul that wants to hear some Torah that didn't hear it in previous generations. So that's how you have to look at a fly. So be careful next time you kill a fly. You may be killing a tzaddik that's coming to hear your Torah. And it can be annoying as well. Why don't they just sit listen quietly on the side of it? So the 10 faculties are, in acronyms, they're Chabad, Chagas, Nehim. It's a Hebrew acronym. And I'll spell them out. So Chabad would be Chachma Bina Das. So 3 cognitive skills. So you can think of it like the right brain, the center brain, right, left, and center brain. More specifically, Chachma would be the concept, the conceiving of an idea, conception, the spark. The idea that comes into your mind when some people in the shower or other unexpected times. Then comes Bina, where Bina is a development of an idea. So most of our ideas actually dissipate. We don't even remember them. The ones we remember, very few of them, they make it into stage 2. But stage 2 is Bina when it's elaborated, where you say, okay, I'm going to do something with this idea. I'll write it down. I'll develop it. Very often in many good companies, you'll find that the two big leaders in any good company, one is a Chochmah type of person, one is a Bina type of person. One is good at conceiving ideas, very, very creative. Creative ideas, always comes up with an idea. The second is very good at fleshing out an idea. And often, very rarely will you find someone that's excellent at both. Because it takes different skills. Fleshing out an idea requires a lot more patience, a lot more detail-oriented, on the ground, dissecting it. Creative people are far more, they shoot ideas. So, Chachma Bina. Number 3, but all of us have all 10. It's just the question is, as we'll discuss, what is dominant, so to speak. The third is Das. Das, you can say, is like the aha. After you go through developing an idea, you come to some type of resonating conclusion. Some type of connecting. You can know something and you can know something. You can know something as an idea or concept developed and so on. Then there comes a point where it becomes one with you. So Das is a far more intimate knowledge. It's called intimacy, actually. In the Torah, the word for sexuality is actually the word Das. Intimate knowing somebody. It's not just knowing them peripherally, but it's an intimate connection. So that covers the first three. Then comes 7 in the emotional spectrum. And these 7 go like this. Chesed is love. Also on the right. Think of it like the right arm. Then you have the left arm is Gevura, which is discipline. And then in the center, the heart is Tiferes, compassion, empathy, or beauty. Then again, the next is Netzach, is endurance, ambition, determination. On the right. On the left, you have Hoid, is humility. And the center, you have Yesod, foundation, or bonding. And finally, the 10th and the 7th of the emotions is Malchus. So Malchus, best translated dignity. It literally means kingship, or sovereignty, but Malchus is dignity. So there you go. That's the spectrum. And from a Kabbalistic point of view, especially once you understand the elaboration of the ideas, these 10 cover everything. When I say everything, obviously we have more than 10 experiences in our lives, because these 10 are intertwined with each other, and they are interdependent. So think of 10 times 10, because then there's Bina within Chachma, Chachma within Bina, and so on. Chesed within Chachma, Chachma within Chesed. So then you get suddenly 10 times 10 is 100, then there's 100 times 10, there's the Chachma within Chesed, and so on. And you can get to 1,000. So basically, the way the Kabbalists explain it, and this is where it gets more complicated, is that everything in existence, every human experience, is some configuration of these 10 spheres. And actually, we rarely find one that's just in its pure, pristine form. Think of the human body. Even if you're able to count all your organs, they interact with each other. The mind and the heart are two distinct entities, but they're constantly overlapping. There are blood vessels in the brain, and there are nerves in the heart. So in the human body, it's not a composite of a whole bunch of dissected, fragmented pieces. It's a whole. You wouldn't call yourself made up of some of your parts. There's more than the sum of the parts. There's a certain integral unity and harmony within all the diversity. And the same thing is with the spheres. They're made their components, but when they work together, they work in a certain harmonious way, and they all are interacting with each other all the time. Mastering this map is not easy. It's a lifetime of work, but it is a map. And you can begin to get a sense of it when you study these ideas. You begin to get a sense. You can actually map out your own spiritual genome. It's one of the projects I'm working on actually now. So if you know the Omer book, I did it to some extent. There I did it with the 7 emotions during those 49 days, 7 times 7. But obviously it gets far more elaborate, and the complexities is not for everybody, it's not for a beginner. So you need to really master this art. But the bottom line is there's a map. There's a map. And all of Jewish tradition has this universal dimension to it that is part of this map. So right now we are called the 10 days of Tshuva, right? That began Rosh Hashanah, 2 days Rosh Hashanah, and will conclude on Yom Kippur, 10 days. That's not an accident, 10 days. That's these 10. Each day corresponds to one of these spheres. And you'll find throughout Jewish thought, you'll find things constantly in numbers 7 and 10, all the time. You go to Sheva Brachas, you go to a wedding, a marriage, a canopy, 7 circles, 7 blessings, 7 all around, 7 days of the week, the cycle. And 10 has its own significance, like the 10 days of Tshuva. Other places you'll find the number 10. 10 commandments, the 10 utterances. The list goes on. Now that doesn't mean there isn't significance to other numbers, but these are the building blocks. So understanding them helps us understand ourselves, basically. If you were able to look at this map, you'd be able to see a mirror image of yourself. But think of it as archetypes. This is critical. Because chesed, if you learn about what chesed is in its purest form, you'll learn what it means to be in its purest form. That doesn't mean you're there. It just means that this faculty, this force this is the way it's supposed to be, like I mentioned before with the lungs. You juxtapose a healthy set of lungs juxtapose a infected lungs over a healthy set of lungs, and you can then just contrast them. The same thing is here. The more you understand the archetypes, the more then you can say, okay, where do I stand in regard to each of these features? How could you ever, let's say, find healthy love if you don't know what healthy love is? Maybe you think you're there already. So you have to have some standard and say, okay, here's the standard, here's the description of it, and then you can have a checklist and say, okay, how many of these elements do I have working? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you get somewhat of a picture of where you stand and where you want to end up being. And this is true for every system. You need to have some type of backdrop that identifies what the perfect picture is like, and then you can begin to grow toward it by comparing where do you stand and what needs to be done to get from here to there. That makes sense, right? It's more complicated than it sounds, because this is good all on paper. When you start having to do it, it's me. When you deal with yourself, we're all good at giving advice to others, right? It's hard. Most of the advice we give to others, we usually don't take ourselves. We often tell people, don't listen to that person. Don't be subjective. And you may make exactly the same mistake while you're advising someone else. I'm sure you've met this irony once and twice in your life. And you may be giving great advice, actually. I'm not suggesting you're not. Why is that the case? That we don't apply it to ourselves? Because there's one little thing, it's called being subjective. In the Hebrew, there's an expression, Adam Karav Eitzel Atzmei. We're subjective, and we have blind spots, and we minimize when it comes to ourselves, and we are uncomfortable. With someone else, you're not uncomfortable, so you share what you see. To yourself, it's not easy to acknowledge a flaw, a mistake, an error, a blind spot, etc. So it becomes more complicated. But if you're a sincere person, an honest person, what you do is you want to look at what the map says, and then try to apply what you can apply. Because if you don't know what that so-called more perfect picture looks like, you're definitely not going to get anywhere. So this period in time where we are now, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, is exactly meant to do that. It's a time of introspection, a time of self-analysis and examination, and it's far easier to do when you have somewhat of a map which to compare yourself to. Most of us don't, that's why it makes it so difficult to really have a meaningful Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur experience. Because what are we supposed to do? You go to synagogue, I'll try to say some prayers. Hopefully the rabbi has something nice to say. Many of us come away disappointed, sometimes not so disappointed. Everybody's got their experience. I can't speak for you. I don't know what you went through Rosh Hashanah. For some it's like torture. Some just simply don't go to synagogue anymore altogether because it doesn't mean anything to them. Everybody's got their own. Some have meaningful experiences as well. And I mean besides the party and the meal and having nice social company, having someone nice to talk to during davening or something like that. I'm talking about something more soulful. So without going into detail, because everybody has their own story, but one thing is for sure, that the potential of using these days, and now Yom Kippur coming into the fullest, is something that I'm sure can always use work. So what I'm addressing now is meant to do exactly that, as I said, pre-Yom Kippur, being the 10th day. So how does this 10 fit into this structure, this map, into these 10 days? And then I'll bring it back to 9/11, and you'll see the significance. So there are different opinions. If you have the book, you have my book, 60 Days, some of you may have that book. So there, if you go to the days between these 10 days, So you'll see that there's actually two opinions of the Kabbalists of how these 10 days are counted, backwards or frontwards. Do you start with Chachma and go to Malchus, or do you start with Malchus and go to Chachma? In other words, is Rosh Hashanah dignity and Yom Kippur Chachma, the concept, or the other way around? So you can see more detail if you look in the book 60 Days. I'm not going to go through all that right now because that's a little more dense. But I want to apply it a little more practically. The bottom line is that these 10 days of Tshuva, they're called the 10 days of building dignity, of building Malchus. Why? Because of these 10 dimensions that I spoke about, 9 are, we'll call, what's the word I would like to use? Proactive or active faculties. And dignity, Malchus, is the one that's not, it's inactive, it's passive. I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's say love, chesed. Chesed has the ability for it to be a verb and a noun. Some say for men, love is a verb, and for women it's a noun. For women it's a state of being, and for men it's an act, which comes and goes. And love is a state of being, it's far deeper, and it's a whole experience. But chesed is definitely, there's the act of love, showing love to somebody, whether through a gesture, or through a touch, or through another act, through words. The same thing is with all the other spheres. Chachma, Bina, Das, for sure, they're intellectual faculties. A person conceives of an idea, develops it, and comes to a conclusion. And you go through the list of all the spheres, they're all active faculties. They're all faculties that are involved in some form of activity, some type of behavior. Comes to when the word dignity, interesting, what is dignity? What act? What could you do that's dignified? Yes, you can behave in a dignified manner, but that's an expression of dignity, not the cause of dignity. Love is an expression. You love someone, you express. What is dignity? So let's describe it for a moment, and you'll see that it happens to be the single most important of all the 10. Even though they're all necessary, and it's hard to say one is more important than the other because you can't be complete without all of them. But when I say most important is this: you could be a very smart person. You can be a person who is emotionally developed and emotionally is alive and kicking. But if you don't sense a sense of self-esteem, of dignity, of self-value, what are you left with? You meet people that have brilliant minds and they have a lot of other skills and very talented, but they don't feel any self-confidence. It's very sad to see, but it's missing the foundation of what a human being is about. When best way I can describe it in the most personal way would be, when we're born and come out of our mother's wombs into this world. So every child is, as I said before, like freshly fallen snow. Everything is possible. Should God bless that soul and enters into the arms of a loving mother and father, what are the mother and father really doing for this child at its early stages of development? They're confirming and validating the child's value, that you're important, that you're necessary, that I'll be there for you no matter what. Unconditional love. And a child surrounded by such feelings and emotions is like being submerged in beautiful warm waters that nurture the child, that as it enters into a hostile and difficult world, its early age is engulfed in love, unconditional love. We can't even estimate what that type of submersion, the immersion that I just described, affects a human being the rest of their lives. Because when you get that, you just have a sense of self, a sense of malchus, in one word, of dignity. Now, tragically, sometimes the only way to really appreciate something is by seeing the contrast. Like if you want to appreciate the sunlight, sometimes you need to use an eclipse. Darkness teaches us more about light than light can teach us. You look at a child born into a home that doesn't have what I just described, and what do you have? A beautiful child. Everything possible. All the gifts and all the skills. The child can be brilliant and be given all the gifts, but they don't develop a sense of self, confidence in themselves, confidence in their choices. What happens is you have a fearful adult growing up into a fearful adult that is constantly tentative about everything, doubts themselves, difficult to make decisions, difficult to make commitments. Now I know I'm using extreme examples here because most of us are somewhere in between. But just to make the case, it's important to use extreme examples because then we can so-called narrow it, then we can qualify it. So what's the worst possible scenario? Not that I want to even paint this picture, but just simply to make it clearer for us. The worst possible picture is a child comes into a world and nobody wants it. And the message it gets, whether with words or with body language, is you're an accident. You're not needed. I don't know what you're doing here. Now, unfortunately, there are children who have gotten this message. More than one, unfortunately. As I said, I hope nobody in this room even knows anyone like this, but this is more common than not. I'm putting it mildly. Just so we always talk positively. So that's the worst case scenario. What happens? The child has all the faculties, born with a brain, born with a mind and a heart, and everything will develop. And that child may grow up to be a genius. But the biggest thing is missing. Sense of self. Doesn't know who I am. Identity crisis. But I don't just mean that in a nice, euphemistic way. I mean it in a very profound way. A lost soul. Someone that's lost within. Now the good news is, even the worst case scenario is not lost, because remember, the soul was not created by the parents. The soul comes from God. So even though the environment may have been a destructive one, definitely not a helpful one, that doesn't mean you're doomed. It just means it makes the work far harder. It would have been a lot easier had that child gotten the validation and confirmation and love that it needed. So Malchus, Yom Kippur, essentially, Malchus is the single most important ingredient in life. Now, of course, if you only have Malchus, you don't have the other 9, then you don't have a functioning human being. We need to have intelligence, and we need to have emotions. We need to be able to live. But there's a certain called a fabric, a foundation behind it all that doesn't allow the structure to really be solid without that sense of self. That's what Yom Kippur does, and that's why in Yom Kippur we have 5 prayers as opposed to all other holidays. All year round, as you know, daily prayers, Jewish prayers, are 3. Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, the morning, the afternoon, evening prayer. On Shabbos and holidays, including Rosh Hashanah, we have 4. Additional Musaf prayer. After the reading of the Torah, there's Musaf that comes. Musaf means additional. And on Yom Kippur, the only day of the year, we have 5 prayers. The 5th one being the Eilah right before sunset, on Yom Kippur day, the end of the Yom Kippur day, meaning late Saturday this year. This is again not an accident. You may be familiar why the reason with this is very simple, because, well, I don't know how simple it is. Once you know it, it's simple. I should add, because just as I said there are 10 building blocks of the soul, there's also 5 dimensions of soul. So there's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. If I'm losing you, I apologize, but hopefully I'm not. But regardless, even what I'm going to say now, maybe it makes things a little more complicated, but I'm going to go back to the ideas with the 10 in a moment. So you have nefesh is biological life, and ruach is emotional life, and neshama is intellectual life, transcendence is chaya, and Yom Kippur, the 5th, is total unity. When your yechida is intact, your malchus is intact, because that means the inner core of who you are recognizes and appreciates its importance, is sensing the indispensability of your life. To put it in other words, as I use in Torah Meaning for Life, birth is God saying you matter, that you are absolutely necessary and indispensable. Imagine you're able to live and breathe that way 24/7, knowing that, and that nobody could ever take that away from you. That would make you basically indestructible. I don't mean that in a physical sense, I mean emotionally and psychologically. That you know that you're absolutely necessary, and nobody gave it to you, so nobody can take it from you. That's Yom Kippur at its finest. And the interesting thing is that we have an ability to access it this Yom Kippur, even if you've never accessed it before. But you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware that the power of Yom Kippur is to strip away the layers, all the contaminated layers of whatever happened to you in your life, and get to that core element of Malchus, pure, unadulterated dignity, the dignity of your life, the majesty of your life and your life's journey. Now, we don't get this message very often, where someone tells you, you're absolutely necessary, you're indispensable, and your life and your life journey is worth it. We don't get the message because we live, number one, in a very commercial world where everybody's trying to sell you something. So all of advertising is based on one thing. If you don't buy it, you're not complete. So actually their message has to be that you're not really worth it until you buy this car, or wear this type of garment, or dress this way, or go to this party, or travel to this place. So essentially the message of all advertising, and even if it's good products, is that you need to feel this, you need to feel that you're not complete without it, and that's why you're ready to purchase it. That's why no one's invested in putting an ad in and saying, birth is God saying you matter no matter what you do, even if you buy nothing. Who's going to pay an ad? Who's going to pay for an ad to tell you to buy nothing? Unless there's a string attached to it. So that's why this message is not something that's common. That's why we should be getting it from the people that love us, because they don't have that type of condition. Now, what happens if you don't get it from the people you love, that love you, are supposed to love you? So we have last resort, Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur gives it to us, because Yom Kippur is God's way of reminding you that's exactly who you are. Now, frankly, if you went into Yom Kippur just with this message and nothing else, I'd be ecstatic. What I mean by that is that many of us think we have to master the art of all the prayers and the whole experience. Great, if you can do that, good luck. The prayer book is a big book, and it takes a lot to master that, and trust me, even the greatest masters don't understand it all. So the key thing is to focus in on something that speaks to you, that speaks to your essence. And if you can have that type of essence, core experience, then Yom Kippur has done something, and that will change your life forever. What I mean by change your life, it'll awaken something in you that you may not have known you had, and that will affect you not just that day, the rest of your life. That's the key, is to find that place inside of us that is absolutely necessary. It's basically, as I said, God saying that you are here on this earth because I put you here, and you have something indispensable, and that's your dignity, and no one else has what you can accomplish. What you have to do, no one but you can do. Now, to elaborate a little bit more on this, let's go back to 9/11. Okay. So what's the connection to 9/11? What is the Sefer Yetzirah saying? 10 but not 9, 10 but not 11. So in life, we have in our bodies, they say 75 trillion cells. Trillion, not billion. It's the only thing they say is more than the American deficit. 75 trillion cells. And the deficit will catch up at some point. But now, you may think, wow, that's a big number, and who cares, one cell or more or less, and so on. No, it's not so simple. You all know, sadly, that an additional chromosome is what creates Down syndrome child. So one mutation, one additional or extra cell, can create havoc. It's not a small little matter. Now you say, what's the big thing out of 75 trillion? Well, we don't need any big examples. Just look at computer code, programming. You can have lines, millions of lines of code, and someone sticks in an extra dot, and no one even knows where it is. Forget about it. The whole program can't do anything about it. You probably can't even find it. Sometimes not even worth looking. You have to redo it. Or missing a dot or extra dot. So in the world in which we live, in a microscopic world, we understand it's not about size anymore, and that things have to be precise. There's actually a law in the Torah that says that you shall not add to the mitzvahs that God gave you and shouldn't subtract from them. Lo yesifim v'lo yisigrun. So the question is asked, why? Not to subtract. Okay, we understand. God gave these laws. You can't start playing around with them and saying, this one's not convenient, that one I can't do, and so on. You could say, I'm not ready for it, but you can't tamper with the Constitution. You can't tamper with the infrastructure. But what's wrong with adding a mitzvah or two? You want to be a little holier? Big thing, so what? And the answer is very obvious. There's two real answers. Well, the first obvious answer is, if you become a partner and you could add, so one day, today you add, tomorrow you subtract. The fact that no one's asking you to add or subtract, do what was told to you. You don't have to add things. Adding, even though it may have good intentions, but the end of the day is that you added it. That means you're an authority here. And if you're an authority, who knows where it's going to go next? So today you add, and then one day you decide, you know what, I added so many, so today I can subtract, I can afford to subtract. That's the obvious reason. But on a deeper level, as I just said, Kol HaMesiv Gereya, the Talmud says. That one that adds, subtracts. We have two eyes on our heads. We don't have to add a third eye. You have one nose. The body is structured in a certain way. Nothing extra, nothing more, nothing less than necessary. I remember once a scientist here at this class who was giving me a hard time, trying to suggest that that everything is random. So I know he happened to be a knowledgeable guy. So I said to him, let me ask you something. The human body, how many components does it have? So he said, millions of components, let alone cells. I said, and is there anything extra or missing in this? So he said, no, it's a perfect machine. And to ways that we can't even understand. I said, so let me ask you something. Today they say that there are two parts of the body that still are, we don't know what their purpose is. One is the appendix, the second is wisdom teeth. There used to be also a third thing called tonsils. I don't know if you're of the age, but I'm of the age where in the 50s, in the 60s, they took out your tonsils if you had a cold, because they thought tonsils were not necessary. Two tonsils here, like two nodes inside your throat, bottom of your throat. So if you had any tonsillitis or whatever. Today they discovered, not now, a few decades back, that tonsils actually prevent certain infections. So I'm one of those that don't have tonsils, what can I tell you? Deficient. So I said to him, so you tell me, there are millions of components in the human body, and none of them are extra. And then we have wisdom teeth and appendix. Well, you say that proves that the whole body doesn't have any design because there are two things that are unnecessary. Or would you say the other way around? If millions of things make sense and two things don't, maybe we haven't figured out yet why the appendix and the wisdom teeth are there. Now, if it was even, if you have 5 items make sense, 5 don't make sense, you could say, okay, it's a fluke. But you can't say millions work perfectly and there are two anomalies. It's illogical to make such a statement. I was just trying to point out to him that that you have to look at the reality. So going back, and the beauty of this is that there's nothing more, there's nothing missing, and there's nothing extra. It was Mozart that said to the Archduke of Austria, when he heard Mozart's music, Mozart was a genius, so he thought he was some connoisseur of music, so he said to Mozart, beautiful music, but far too many notes. Understand? So Mozart purportedly responded, he said, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. Far too many notes. So it's like someone coming to an artist who created a beautiful piece of art and say, you know what, I don't like this, I don't like that, without even giving it any thought. At least give the respect and ask, why do you need these components? Maybe there's a reason. But the point I'm making here is that real beauty is not extra and not less, not more. So that's what the Sefer Yetzirah is saying. 10, not 9. 10, not 11. You could say 11. What big thing? I have 10 plus 1. What's wrong with that? I have 10 minus 1. Not so bad. I have 9 out of 10. But in a perfect symmetry, a perfect structure, you need 10. Now let's take it now to the spheres. Because remember, it's talking about spheres, structure. If you have 9 and not 10 and not 9, that's very nice. If you have 9 and not 10, you have everything but Malchus. You're missing the most important thing in life, which is sense of self. And if you have 10 and 11 and not 10, what's wrong with that? Well, that goes back to being holier than thou. So let me bring it now back to 9/11. Okay, so 9/11 brought together, and I'm using now language that some of, I read the people who flew those planes into the World Trade Center 12 years ago today. They found the documents that they were reading the night before they did this. Now there's also other things they did the night before, which is not to mention here. But they had these documents with them, these words, these texts, scriptures, and it's online. You can find what they read. Now you'd think they were reading the plans of how to fly a plane, what to do if a guard comes in, how to use the box cutters, how to charge the cockpit. Right? That's what you think you're reading. You're reading you're doing at least do a dress rehearsal or something. No, the documents are all these sacred texts that talk about a soul's mission in this world, and that it doesn't even talk about death. It doesn't even talk about killing infidels. There's not even the word death or blood or anything like that. It all talks about God's purpose in life, the purpose of existence, and fulfilling that purpose, and so on. You read it, it's quite chilling, because you'd think, criminals, they're about to blow up, they wanted to take far many lives than what happened. I mean, if you remember that day, everyone estimated 30, 40, 50,000 just that morning in Manhattan, on 9 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday morning, a weekday. And it was, every death is a tragedy, but it was nothing close to what could have been. So they were going to do that, and they're reading these sacred texts. And it's quite chilling, because you start saying, what's with these guys? And then you discover they're not really criminals. It's not like guys they schlepped out of some prison and said, go blow up a plane, go blow up a building. These are people who are ideologically driven. And if you were sitting with them, what would they be talking about? They may be talking about spiritual matters. That makes it far more complicated. Now everybody still wonders till this day, why did 9/11 happen? What was their point? Why would some people and they knew they're going to die? Why would they do this? If he thought it was like the Nazis, God forbid, who were planning an invasion of the United States, so it's to confuse the enemy, they blow up their big buildings, and then comes a big invasion. But nothing followed, there was no invasion. So what was it? It was just to, give us a black eye? Just to humiliate, to what? What's the purpose? And this question it may sound simple, but, in history, every war had a purpose. As demonic as Hitler, Yimach Shemay, was, but everyone knew what his purpose was. He felt the Aryan race was superior, eliminate the Jews, Lebensraum for the pure Aryan race, all of Europe and all of the world. He wanted to own the world and all its resources. It's very clear what he wanted. As much as it was repulsive, but we knew what he wanted. What did Al Qaeda? What did Bin Laden want? So I was obsessed with this question. So I began to research it back then, 9/11 time. And that's where I really came to realize the Sefer Yetzirah and the 9/11, how close it is. You'll see, it's not forced. It's quite obvious. So I began to read that Bin Laden was a very privileged guy. He grew up in an aristocratic, princely family in Saudi Arabia, with a lot of wealth, a lot of education, studied in Western universities. We're not talking about some type of third world loser. Talking about a person who was very sophisticated. So studying, who influenced him? What happened? So yes, his big godfather, his big so-called mentor, was a man called Qutb, Qutb. He's considered the father of modern Muslim fundamentalism. One of the fathers. He was actually executed by President Nasser in Egypt in 1968, because he was a threat to the more secular Arab rule of Nasser. This was right after the 6-Day War. So he was a threat, because he was a very religious, he was what they call today the Muslim Brotherhood. He was one of the big founders of that. What does Qutb write? And I'm not here to give you a lesson in Islam. I know you didn't come here Erev Yom Kippur, but here about Muslim theology. But sometimes you learn a lot from reading other stuff, and you'll see there's unbelievable insight that I learned from this. I'm going to bring it back to Sefer Yetzirah. Trust me, I'm a proud Jew, and my goal is to talk about Judaism, which precedes all these religions anyway. So we can pull rank if we wish. But remember, on Rosh Hashanah we did read about Yishmael. The whole story about Yishmael is read on Rosh Hashanah. So, briefly, Qutb wrote a 60-volume commentary on the Quran. So he was a pretty heavyweight himself, but quite radical. What does he write? He writes the following. Now this is going to be a little, I'm sure, disturbing. He writes that the purpose that God created this world for a purpose. The purpose is to transform the world and make it into a spiritual environment. So far so good, right? We all agree with that. Then he says that God chose the Jewish people to do this. And then they failed. They built a golden calf, and they sinned, and they failed. So then God chose another nation, called the Christians. Another nation, another peoples. And they failed even more. And then God, I'm going to give you the short version. And then God chose Muhammad and the Islam faith. They're the final chosen people to do what the Jews and the Christians did not do. Okay, fine. Listen, he's entitled to his opinion. If it stopped there, fine. Different opinions on the matter. But then he goes on and he continues and talks about modern history. And he says, and since Islam has begun doing this job, it started conquering and bringing God's unadulterated law to the Middle East, and then to Europe, to Spain, the Ottoman Empire, and so on. But then the conspiracy of the Crusaders and what they call today the Crusaders and Zionists, you always hear these words, it all comes from these ideas. What are the Crusaders? The Crusaders haven't been around for 800 years. But the Crusaders, the Christian Jewish, pitted against the Muslims. So then they came and to humiliate us. In the beginning of the 20th century, they destroyed the Ottoman Empire. And what they did is they threw us back into the Middle Ages, trying to claim that we still belong with camels and donkeys, and we're a third world country. When we brought astronomy, art, music, science, mathematics to the world. And they stole all of that from us and just want to turn us back into primitive beings, humiliating us. So it's a battle of God versus a decadent secular world. Then he came to the United States and he saw what's going on in New York and Los Angeles, Hollywood, and so on. It just confirmed all his thoughts. He wrote, and he just emphasized this word, that the Western world is all about materialism and selfishness, and it's a war of bringing God into a world that is essentially, he sees the whole world as Sodom and Gomorrah. And the Jews and the Christians lead the way because they're the ones that messed it up, and they cannot stand the idea that God chose now the Muslims. Now finally, where he gives himself away is anti-Semitic stuff, which I'm not going to quote here. It's not really, when you read this, you hear some sophistication at least, it may be wrong, but then he goes on for a whole thing about Jews. It's not relevant to our discussion anyway. I know it's a juicy part, maybe you want to hear that. You can look it up yourself. No, just sentence, I have no reason to repeat, there's no value to it. Then he goes on and says, and now this war has to be fought in every possible way, even if it's violence. So for him, jihad means actual violent war. This is Bin Laden's teacher. This is the people who came to the World Trade Center 12 years ago to blow up, read these documents. So what were they reading? They were reading what we read. That you're God's messengers to bring God into this world. And don't let anything distract you from doing that. That was in their minds. And I have no doubt that they believe that. Because I don't think we're talking about people who are just criminals who are murdering people. And you know what? We hired them now to murder Americans. It's driven by, it's a spiritual, religious war, which I know most people just don't want to hear. People can't stand hearing that. Because then we have thrown back into religious wars. Who wants to hear about that? We thought we got rid of that since before the Enlightenment. We didn't get rid of it. Now, I'm not suggesting that 1.5 billion Muslims are all terrorists. I'm not suggesting a very small percentage are, but I am suggesting that they are all have an ideology. And the ideology of Islam per se actually could be very compatible with Judaism and with spiritual philosophies as long as you eliminate certain points. My feeling is that Islam today, the Middle East is the breeding ground. Islam today is very much where Christianity was in the 16th and 15th century. Seriously. Middle Ages. Which is, it's not yet made a reconciliation of how to reconcile faith with the modern world. Simple as that. And this brings me back to 9, 10, and 11. Abraham is the father of all nations. He had in his home, in his tents, he had a son called Yishmael, who would become the ancestor of the Muslim world. He had a son called Isaac, who would become the ancestor of the Jewish world. And he had a grandson. Isaac had 2 children. Esau, who would become the grandfather of Rome and the Western Christian world. And Jacob, also the Jewish. So, whatever we have today were 3 boys, young boys growing up in a home of Abraham. And if you study their lives, you'll see in the Bible they are fighting all the time. Yishmael and Yitzchak don't get along, and Esav and Jacob don't get along. Even in their mother's womb, they were fighting. And the Torah says, 2 nations inside of you. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that long before 9/11 and long before the battles that we see today, the Bible talks about these battles. It's pretty interesting, right? It talks about these battles literally. It's not interpretation. It's pure biblical texts. So what were they fighting about? That's the question. They were fighting about 9, 10, and 11. And I'll capture it in a story the Talmud tells. The story goes like this. Rashi Bar Yochai was the great author of the Zohar. He's a great sage and a great mystic. You all know Lag BaOmer, big pilgrimages go on in the north of Israel, Miran, his gravesite. So Rashi Bar Yochai had to go into hiding because the Romans had decreed that Jews are not allowed to study Torah. And since he was a great teacher, they wanted to arrest and kill him. So he went into hiding for 12 years. He hid in a cave. The whole story of how he survived. After 12 years, the decree was over, or someone died, whatever, and he came back to civilization. And you can imagine after 12 years, the Talmud says how refined he was, because he was studying and praying all this time. He comes back to civilization, his intensity is so deep. It says whatever he looked at, it began to burn. So that's the expression. Whether it's literal or metaphorical, can be interpreted either way. Why did it begin to burn? Because his eyes were so holy that when he looked at the pettiness of people's lives, so what they argued about, the superficial lives people lived, he was intolerant of it. So it began to burn, as I said, metaphorically or literally. So God says to him an interesting thing. You think, what's wrong with that? It's a pretty holy man. Everything he looks at burns. You know? I mean, that wasn't meant to be a joke, but I'm glad it elicited a laugh. Okay. It came out a certain way, I understand. Okay. God says to him, no, you're not ready. Go back a 13th year, bar mitzvah, and reach a level of spiritual maturity that when you come back, whatever you see, you will repair instead of making it burn. It's a key difference. So which is greater, a person who's so holy that's not tolerant of anything around them, or a person who is so holy that he's able to help repair something? So you think the first one is more intense, but the second one is more mature. And this was the battle going on in Abraham's home. Abraham was teaching a new faith. Up till Abraham, they were pagans. Abraham, a new faith, I should say. He discovered God. And he said, we have to make God part of our lives. We have to live lives of decency, of virtue, of justice, of charity. This was Abraham. And complete pioneer. There was no one, he had no one to look at, he had no teachers. He learned this completely from within. The real pioneer, the real nonconformist. How religion became conformity from that is a whole other bizarre journey. But that was Abraham, complete pioneer. And he challenged the systems and the establishment, and he was a threat to everybody. Because he was saying, not the king, and not the head of the church, and not this one, no one is, there's only one God. And we all submit to that same God, and there's no one that's closer to God than another. This is very threatening to any power structure, any hierarchy. And he didn't just speak about it philosophically, he's teaching it to his children, to Yishmael and to Isaac, and saying, I want you to dedicate your life. That's what he says, God says, here's a man that committed his family to these values. It wasn't just a philosophical system. He committed his family, to live lives of charity and justice and virtue. But that's not an easy thing to do in this world, because people are driven by self-interest. People are driven by their own, and even religion has been hijacked by many. So what do you do with that? What do you do when you face someone that's opposing a life of selflessness? So this is where Yishmael was like Rashbi. He was very holy and said, you have to burn him down. And Yitzchak was more tempered, but it was still not resolved until the next generation, where the children of Isaac, Esav and Jacob also had this battle. I'm not going to go through all the details because of time, but I will say like this, the same thing. Jacob was Tiferes. Jacob was a balanced approach. You have to find a way to repair and transform the world, not to destroy it. So in an interesting way, what's happening here is that sometimes too much religion, as I said, adding too much can actually be subtracting. And that was the battle that was going on. How do you find a healthy balance? And look at history. What happened? As religion began to spread, initially it was teaching good values, then it became a corrupt power of its own. So suddenly, it became the enemy. So that's why it shouldn't surprise us that in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, when the so-called rebellion against religion began, it was a rebellion against authorities and power. It wasn't a rebellion against God per se. It was against those that said they were speaking the name of God. Even when you read Nietzsche, when he said God is dead, those that read it well know that he was saying the God that you taught us is dead. Maybe there's another God, but we don't know about him. Or as the joke goes, Nietzsche said God is dead, and God said Nietzsche is dead. So you have to always look at the end of the story. Who gets the last laugh, as they say. The Enlightenment, the thinkers of Enlightenment thought that religion would be dead by the 20th century. Or maybe just the product of the really inferior people who are in need of a crutch. The fact of the matter is, the battle of history, if you want to sum it up, has been a battle between these two extremes. Self-interest and higher interest. And when they clash, you'll always find the problem that the Rashbi encountered. Do you destroy, or do you live a life of asceticism and separate yourself? But to enter and learn how to transform is the hardest process. That's why you have the Crusaders, the Inquisition. What was their approach? We have to force religion upon others. Forced baptisms, forced conversions. Yaakov and the Jews who received the Torah always knew that the balance was the approach. You have to bring the divine into this world, but not through destroying the world. And it would be a long, dragged-out battle. So, what's 9/11? 9/11 is exactly that. Either you're missing something, either you're missing Malchus, or you're adding something. You're adding too much. You cannot overwhelm a world with the name of... I have a few Muslim friends I know. And I said to them, I don't understand something. You talk about infidels of the West. But the father of your grandfather and my great-grandfather, his name was Abraham, we have a story in the Torah that talks about what you do when you see infidels. It was called a city called Sodom. What did Abraham do? Everybody knows the story. That when God tells Abraham he's going to destroy the wicked city of Sodom, Abraham, not only doesn't he begin to celebrate, he begins to pray for them. So why don't we learn from that? I have no answer. I've not yet found a Muslim that could answer this question. Why don't you learn from that? That Abraham taught how to transform, not how to destroy. You know, you'd think it's to be the happiest thing. Infidels are burning. And everyone agreed Sodom was wicked. Well, that becomes, I guess, part of the maturity process. So, therefore, the 9/11 and 10 is very much connected to, actually, the events that happened on 9/11. The events of remembering that God created 7 billion people on this earth. And everyone has Malchus, no matter who you are. Jew, non-Jew, Christian, Muslim, non-believer. Everybody has Malchus, the divine image in which the human being was created. If we all respected that, we'd have the 10. You wouldn't have a 9 and 11. You wouldn't have a 9/11. And you need to add anything. You don't need to subtract anything. Judaism is a religion that does not, I don't even call it a religion, does not encourage conversion. And it surprises many people because Judaism precedes Christianity and Islam. That nobody can change. So where do they get the idea that it's a conquest to convert somebody? Especially a Jew. It was always considered. And missionaries were sent, and even till today, Islam is the fastest growing religion, especially in Africa. It's a mission to get people to convert. It almost sounds almost like commercial. You got to get them to become your customers. Why did Judaism not encourage conversion? Very simple reason. Because every person on earth is created by God the way you are, and you can serve God the way you are. You don't need to be a Jew. They used to say, you don't need to be a Jew to wear Levi's, right? What was it? Or to eat Levi's, what was it? Not to wear Levi's, eat Levi's. They had Levi's bread or something. Every person can serve God as they are. There's no need to change anything. So I'm not here to say any critique, but as soon as I hear that somebody feels they need to change somebody, you wonder whether that's coming from an insecure place or not. Because if you're secure with your God, why do you need to change someone else? And of course, being a wise Jew, you want to think also, well, maybe if they came first, maybe they wouldn't think that way. If you know what I'm saying. It's like you don't need a New Testament if you have the original one. So maybe there's an insecurity involved in that. But I'm not here to criticize. I'm just here to make an observation. As I said, I do have to get the last word here. And then I'm not talking about Kitab and about Christian theology. I'm talking about Judaism. And Yom Kippur is upon us. And I want to speak as a proud Jew. So I have no, even though I've read these books and all of what they've written, but I have to say clearly, preempting it all is the Sefer Yetzirah said it all. 9, 10, not 9, 10, not 11. You respect the dignity of every person. You have the humility to understand that your relationship with God is between you and God, and your job with other people is simply one thing: either to bring inspiration and love, or no one gave you the job to kill others in the name of God. Then we'd have a world, we wouldn't have any of the problems we have today. This is the essence of what I think Yom Kippur is, what Judaism is all about. And on a personal note, this is all taken more globally, personal note, I want to go back to that point of Malchus. Each of you has inside of you the same battles. We have the Yishmael inside of us, the Esav inside of us, the Jacob inside of us. And the challenge is balance. Balance is always the key. Because it's very easy to go to one extreme to the next. The key is to find, how do you find that balance? And the balance is connected to the dignity that I described before. People... you don't need to be wrong for me to be right. You know that statement? Why not? Because if I'm confident in my own opinion, why do I need to make you wrong? You could hold your position, that doesn't change my position. But people who feel that someone else has to be wrong for them to be right means, because if you're right, then maybe I'm wrong. There's a lack of knowing, things have to be generated from within. So I want to bless everybody here. As we go into Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur is a day where you have the opportunity to connect to that inner you. Maybe someone that you haven't met so often. Some call it the inner child, but the inner you. And if you just allow yourself to go into the day, the holy day of Yom Kippur, starting Friday night, by number one is just clearing your head, like your hard drive, as much as you can. And I think every one of us can do it to some extent. I'm giving you a suggestion how we can appreciate the yechida, the essence and core of your own identity in Yom Kippur. The first thing is kol nidre. Kol nidre means you absolve yourself of all your commitments and all your vows and all your inhibitions, attachments. Talking about unhealthy attachments. You go into Yom Kippur like a newborn child. We wear white. Everything is like literally clean slate. Just take that attitude as much as you can. I know it's not easy to do, because you say, one second, how am I supposed to suddenly erase someone that told me something Friday afternoon that made me upset? Well, listen, as adults, sometimes you just have to say to yourself, it's a holy day, let me just shut it all off and try for a few hours to just concentrate on something positive. Because remember, if you bring your mind and your heart is all infected by the toxins that have affected you that day or the day before, then what do you expect Yom Kippur? What is it supposed to do? It's like going into a beautiful palace and your garments are all soiled. You can't appreciate it. I'm not saying that you can't benefit at all, but the more you can, so to speak, create space, the more you'll be able to absorb the Yom Kippur energy, power. So that's the first thing, is just to prepare yourself to set your mind. I think all of us can do it, at least for one night. For one day would be even better. And then choose the times. I can't say everybody feels able to be in a synagogue all the time, but choose the times that you're there. But you're there, take it seriously. Don't just go as don't just go mechanically by rote. And take a few prayers. Doesn't have to be many, and try to connect to them. So obviously doing a little homework will help. My book 60 Days is very helpful, I believe. If you go to the prayer section. You can choose a few prayers and just decide, I'm going to concentrate on these prayers, and there's nothing wrong with reading them beforehand. So then when you're ready to read it, you don't have to read it anew. You'll be ready for it. Now obviously the big highlight moments of Yom Kippur throughout the day is a holy day, but obviously the beginning, Kol Nidre, for those that say Yizkor, there's around 12, 1, depending which synagogue. And then of course the last prayer that I mentioned, the unique Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah. before sundown. At least those 3 moments. And I hope nobody has to say Yizkor, so you don't have to do that one either. But at least 2 out of the 2 or 3 moments. Now, if you can spend more time and it's going to be meaningful, by all means. But I'm just trying to make it also digestible that it can work. The key here is not quantity, the key is quality. Find something and go for it all the way. Now do remember, by Ne'ilah, the highest point, it's the shortest prayer actually, it's right before sundown. That's the moment of the moment, meaning the highest point. That is like, Jews always knew, whether they were in hell or in heaven, whether they were in Auschwitz, or they were in the best times, they always knew that Yom Kippur, at the end of the day, that's the connection. We're here as a nation because something is indestructible. Nobody can understand it. We don't even understand it. Why after the Holocaust we're still around, and all the persecutions before that. But there's some mystery, some secret of Yom Kippur, and especially in the Ne'ilah, that everyone knew that was the moment that you recognize that you're a Jew, you're committed, you're chosen by God, you have something of indispensable value to contribute. You connect to that, at least that moment, in a deep way. The goal is, of course, that it should have impact that will last and spill over the rest of the year. And if it spills over the rest of the year, you'll be in good shape. Because many magical moments, when they happen, then it dissipates. So here, of course, the objective is to make it happen and then hold on to it for your dear life. So, that's my Yom Kippur suggestion. I hope it's received with the intentions as it was given, and that is that to recognize the indispensable musical note that each of you are, and that hopefully this year you can really access it maybe in new ways, and hold on to it for your dear life, as I said. And then comes Sukkot, where we celebrate it all. But because of this year's schedule, Sukkot is Wednesday night, and so is Simchas Torah and Shemini Atzeret. So we won't have classes the next 2 weeks, even though I'd love to be with you and celebrate. So I'll have to be in spirit. And I hope that I can do it through these words that I shared here. And also, please see 60 days as my personal note to all of you, because it goes through the whole holiday season. And Sukkot is the embrace. We celebrate what we experienced on Yom Kippur. That's really the essence of Sukkot. So may you all dance well when it comes to that point. But before that, there's a moment of seriousness. And remember, focusing on that soul that you have, that's unique, indispensable, and irreplaceable. So everyone should have a Gmachsim Ateva, a very good Gevenst year. We have here the book 60 Days if you want, as well as Torah Meaning for Life. And again, I want to wish everyone a very blessed year. We'll see each other hopefully right after Simchas Torah that week. And if anything we could help you with as far as need a place to go to or anything, please call upon us. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow, his Pre-Yom Kippur class. And everyone should have a blessed year, materially and spiritually, all in good health.